I never thought a propane tank would become the center of my life for 3 months. But when you live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and your neighbor is the HOA president, even the most mundane things can explode into full-blown warfare. My name is Peter Kellerman, and I bought my house in the Sunset Ridge community 2 years ago. It was a dream property with a massive backyard, a gorgeous pool, and enough space to finally feel like I had made it after 20 years of grinding in commercial real estate. The house cost me a cool $1.2 million, which in Scottsdale is actually reasonable for what I got. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and most importantly, that pool. The previous owner had installed a propane heating system for it, which was a godsend because even Arizona gets chilly in the winter months, and I loved my morning swims year-round. The propane tank sat on the east side of my property, partially hidden by some desert landscaping and a tasteful wooden enclosure. It was a 500-gallon tank, white, clean, and completely up to code. The installation had been done by a licensed contractor, and I had all the permits and documentation filed with the county. Everything was legitimate, professional, and frankly, nobody's business but mine. That is, until Deborah Owens moved in next door. Deborah was 52, divorced, and had the kind of energy that made you tired just looking at her. She wore her blonde hair in that specific cut that seems to be issued along with the title of HOA president. You know the one. Within a week of moving in, she had positioned herself to take over as president of our HOA board. The previous president, a retired accountant named George, had been pretty laid back. George's philosophy was basically that as long as you were not painting your house neon pink or raising livestock, he did not care what you did. Deborah had other ideas. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was sitting on my back patio, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the McDowell Mountains in shades of orange and pink. The pool heater had kicked on automatically at 6 a.m., just like it did every morning, warming the water to a perfect 78 degrees for my 7:30 swim. I heard the clicking of heels on my driveway before I saw her. Deborah appeared around the corner of my house, clipboard in hand, wearing a blazer despite the fact that it was already 75 degrees outside. "Good morning, Peter," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She did not wait for an invitation before walking into my backyard. "Morning, Deborah," I replied, setting down my coffee. "Something I can help you with. I am conducting a property inspection," she announced, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "As the new HOA president, I want to ensure all homes in Sunset Ridge are in full compliance with our community standards." I felt my jaw tighten. I was not aware we had scheduled inspections. "We do not need to schedule them," she said, her eyes scanning my backyard like a hawk looking for prey. "The HOA bylaws give me the authority to inspect any property at any time to ensure compliance." I made a mental note to actually read through those bylaws, something I had been putting off since I moved in. Before I could respond, Deborah's eyes locked onto something, and I saw her face transform. It was like watching someone win the lottery, except the prize was finding something to complain about. "What," she said, pointing with her pen, "is that?" I followed her gaze to the propane tank enclosure. "That is my propane tank. It heats the pool." "That is a violation," she declared, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "A violation of what exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though I could feel heat rising in my chest. Section 7, Subsection 4 of the Sunset Ridge Community Standards clearly states that all utility equipment must be completely concealed from view and not visible from any neighboring property. I stood up and walked over to the enclosure. "It is concealed." That is literally why I built this wooden enclosure around it. I can see it from my bedroom window, Deborah insisted. Your bedroom window is on the second floor. You would have to actively try to see it, and even then, you can only see the top 6 inches of the tank. She clicked her pen repeatedly, a sound that would haunt my dreams. Regardless, it is visible, therefore it is a violation. You have 30 days to remove it or face fines. Remove it. Deborah, that tank is permanently installed and connected to my pool heating system. I cannot just remove it. And why would I? It is completely legal and permitted. HOA regulations supersede county permits, she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. 30 days, Peter. I will be sending you an official notice. She turned on her heel and marched out of my backyard, leaving me standing there wondering what the hell just happened. That evening, I dug out my copy of the HOA bylaws and community standards. I went through every single page twice. Section 7. Subsection 4 did indeed mention that utility equipment should be concealed from view, but it also included an exception for equipment that was necessarily visible for safe operation and properly screened to minimize visual impact. My propane tank absolutely fell under that exception. It needed to be visible for the propane delivery trucks to access it and for safety inspections. The wooden enclosure I had built minimized the visual impact as much as was reasonably possible. I drafted a polite but firm email to Deborah, citing the specific language in the bylaws and explaining why my tank was in full compliance. I attached photos showing the enclosure from multiple angles and included copies of all my permits and the original installation documentation. Her response came within an hour. Your interpretation is incorrect. The violation stands. You have 29 days remaining. Over the next week, I tried to reason with her. I called, I emailed, I even went to her house with the actual bylaws printed out and highlighted. She refused to budge. According to Deborah, the board had discussed it, though I suspected the board was really just her making decisions and telling everyone else what they were, and the decision was final. What really got under my skin was her hypocrisy. Deborah had a satellite dish mounted on the side of her house that was visible from the street. She had a rather large AC condenser unit that sat right next to her driveway. She even had some kind of water filtration system with an exposed tank in her side yard. But apparently, those did not count as violations because reasons. On day 28, I received a certified letter. The HOA was fining me $500 for the violation, with additional fines of $100 per day for every day I remained in non-compliance after the 30-day deadline. That was when I decided to do some investigating. I started by actually reading through the rest of the HOA documents, all of them, including the original CC and Articus from when the community was first developed. That is when I found something interesting. The community pool and recreation area, which included a gym, tennis courts, and a clubhouse, was on a shared water and heating system. The original developer had installed a complex network of pipes that connected several properties to allow for efficient heating and water circulation. My property was one of them. When the previous owner had installed the propane system for my pool, they had not just installed it for my pool alone. The system was actually designed to help heat both my pool and supplement the heating for the community pool. There was a valve system in place that allowed my propane tank to feed into the main line when the community system needed extra heating capacity, particularly during the winter months when both pools were in heavy use. I called the original installation company and spoke to the engineer who had designed the system. His name was Marcus, and he was extremely helpful once I explained the situation. Oh yeah, I remember that job. Marcus said. The developer wanted redundancy in the system. Your tank is actually a critical part of the heating infrastructure for the whole recreation area. There should be documentation about this in the HOA maintenance files. Would the HOA board know about this? I asked. They should. The management company definitely knows because they call us for maintenance on the system twice a year. In fact, we were just out there last month doing the annual inspection. This was getting interesting. I sent an email to the HOA management company requesting all documentation related to the heating system for the community recreation area. Under Arizona law, HOA members have the right to access association records with reasonable notice. They had 10 business days to comply. Meanwhile, the deadline passed, and Deborah wasted no time. I received another certified letter informing me that I was now being fined $100 per day. She also sent a notice to the entire community email list, without naming me specifically but making it very clear who she was talking about residents who refuse to comply with community standards and are accruing significant fines. I ran into my neighbor Tom at the mailbox that afternoon. Tom was a retired software engineer, quiet guy, mostly kept to himself. "Hey, Peter, sorry about what is happening with Deborah," he said, glancing around as if she might be listening. "She has been on a tear lately. Did you know she fined the Hendersons because their desert willow tree was 6 inches taller than the height limit? You are kidding." "Nope. They had to have a tree trimmer come out. Cost them $300 plus the $50 fine." "This is insane," I said. Tom nodded. "Between you and me, a lot of people are pretty fed up. But she threatened to fine anyone who challenges her authority for creating a hostile environment. I do not know if she can actually do that, but nobody wants to risk it." That evening, I received the documentation from the management company. It was exactly what Marcus had told me. My propane system was integrated into the community heating infrastructure. There were schematics, maintenance logs, and even a clause in the original development agreement stating that the system must remain in place and operational. I now had leverage. The next morning, I sent Deborah an email with all the documentation attached. I explained that not only was my propane tank in compliance with the bylaws, but it was actually a required part of the community infrastructure. I suggested we drop this matter and move on. Her response was swift and venomous. "Your tank is still visible from my property. The violation stands. You now owe $600 in fines with $100 per day continuing to accrue. If you do not pay within 15 days, we will place a lien on your property." That was it. I was done playing nice. I called Marcus back. "The valve system that connects my tank to the community heating system, can I shut it off?" There was a pause. "Well, yes, technically. There is a manual shut-off valve in your utility box. But if you do that during the winter months, or even now in March when the mornings are still cold, the community pool is not going to heat properly. They would have to rely entirely on their solar heating, which is not really sufficient when it is below 60 degrees at night. And there is nothing in my documentation that requires me to keep it open." Another pause. "Let me check the original contracts." I heard papers rustling. "No, actually, the system was designed to be supplemental. You have the right to disconnect at any time for maintenance or personal reasons." The HOA was supposed to have their own backup propane system installed, but I do not think they ever did it because yours was working fine. "Thanks, Marcus. That is exactly what I needed to know." I did not shut off the valve immediately. First, I wanted to try one more time to resolve this reasonably. I requested an emergency board meeting, which under the bylaws I had the right to do. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. I showed up with a folder full of documentation, prepared to make my case. The board consisted of Deborah, a retired teacher named Linda, and a dentist named Robert. Linda seemed uncomfortable, and Robert kept checking his phone like he wanted to be anywhere else. Deborah called the meeting to order with all the formality of a Supreme Court session. Mr. Kellerman has requested this meeting to discuss his ongoing violation. Peter, you have 15 minutes. I laid out my case methodically. I explained the bylaw's exception. I showed the permits. I presented the documentation about the integrated heating system. I even had Marcus on speakerphone to verify the technical details. When I finished, Linda looked at Deborah. This seems pretty straightforward. His tank is permitted and it is actually helping heat our community pool. I do not see the violation. Deborah's face flushed red. The tank is visible from my property. That is the violation. But he has shown that it falls under the exception clause, Linda pressed. I disagree with his interpretation, Deborah snapped. Robert finally looked up from his phone. Deborah, I think we should drop this. It seems like a waste of everyone's time. We are not dropping it, Deborah said, her voice rising. I am the president of this board and I am telling you this is a violation. We vote now. All in favor of maintaining the violation and the fines, say aye. Aye, Deborah said loudly. Linda and Robert were silent. All opposed? Nay, said Linda. Nay, said Robert. Deborah's face went from red to purple. Fine. The violation is rescinded. This meeting is adjourned. She gathered her papers and stormed out of the clubhouse. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that I was being fined $750 for creating a hostile environment and undermining the authority of the HOA board by requesting the emergency meeting. According to Deborah, I had wasted community resources and caused undue stress to board members. I sat in my kitchen, staring at this letter, and something inside me just snapped. I had tried to be reasonable. I had tried to follow the rules. I had tried to work within the system. And this woman was just making up violations out of thin air because she could not stand being told she was wrong. I walked out to my utility box, found the valve that controlled the flow from my propane system to the community heating line, and shut it off completely. Then I sent an email to Deborah with a CC to the management company and the other board members. Due to ongoing harassment and unfounded fines, I am exercising my right to disconnect my propane heating system from the community recreation area heating network, effective immediately. As this is my private property and equipment, I am under no obligation to provide supplemental heating to HOA facilities. All future heating needs for the community pool and recreation area will need to be met through your own systems. I hit send and waited. The first response came within 20 minutes. It was from the management company. Mr. Kellerman, we need to discuss this. Can you please call me at your earliest convenience? Sharon Mitchell, community manager. I called Sharon. She sounded stressed. Peter, I understand you are frustrated, but shutting off the heating system is going to cause major problems. The community pool is heavily used, and without your system supplementing ours, the water temperature is going to drop significantly. That sounds like a problem for the HOA to solve, I said calmly. Look, I have been reviewing the situation, and I think Deborah has overstepped here. These fines she is issuing are not appropriate. But can you please turn the system back on while we sort this out? I am worried about the liability if pool temperatures drop too much and someone complains. Sharon, I appreciate that you are trying to do your job, but I am done being the HOA's unpaid heating provider while simultaneously being harassed and fined for the equipment that is helping them. If the board wants to rescind all fines, issue a written apology, and agree to leave me and my propane tank alone, I will consider turning it back on. Until then, they can figure out their own heating solution. There was a long silence. I will talk to the board, Sharon finally said. That evening, my phone started ringing. First it was Robert, the dentist board member, asking me to please turn the system back on. Then it was Linda, practically begging. I told them both the same thing: rescind the fines, apologize, or the valve stays closed. Deborah herself never called. By Friday, the community pool temperature had dropped from a comfortable 78 degrees to a chilly 67 degrees. The gym regulars who came for early morning water aerobics were complaining. The kids who used the pool after school were complaining. The evening lap swimmers were complaining, and everyone was complaining to Deborah. I heard about it from Tom, who heard it from his wife, who was in the water aerobics class. Deborah tried to blame it on a mechanical failure, Tom said, but someone on the board, I think it was Linda, told everyone that you shut off your supplemental heating because Deborah was fining you unfairly. Now, everyone is mad at Deborah. The following Tuesday, there was an emergency HOA meeting that I did not call. Half the community showed up. I went and sat in the back, not saying a word. Deborah tried to maintain control, but it was like watching the Titanic sink. Resident after resident stood up to complain about the pool temperature, and when they learned why it had changed, they turned their anger on Deborah. "You are fining him for a legal propane tank," one woman demanded. "This is ridiculous," another person said. "I looked at his tank." You can barely see it unless you are specifically looking for it. An older gentleman I recognized from my morning swims stood up. "I have been using that pool for 8 years. The heating has always been good." If Peter's system is part of why it works so well, then maybe we should be thanking him instead of fining him. Deborah tried to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out. Linda called for a vote of no confidence in Deborah's leadership. Robert seconded it. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor. Deborah was removed as HOA president effective immediately. Linda took over as interim president. After the meeting, Linda approached me in the parking lot. "Peter, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize. All fines against you are rescinded as of tonight. We will send you a formal letter tomorrow, and I promise you, we will not be bothering you about your propane tank or anything else unless there is a real, genuine issue." "I appreciate that, Linda," I said. "So, about the heating system," she said hesitantly. "I know you have every right to keep it shut off, but is there any way we could work something out?" I thought about it. "Here is my proposal. The HOA has been getting free supplemental heating from my system for years. I pay for the propane, I pay for the maintenance, and I take on the liability of having that tank on my property. If the HOA wants to continue benefiting from it, I think it is fair that the HOA covers the cost of the propane that goes toward heating the community pool." Linda nodded slowly. "That seems more than fair. Let me run it by the board and the management company. I am sure we can work something out." Within a week, we had an agreement. The HOA would reimburse me for 50% of my propane costs, which represented approximately the amount used for the community heating system. They would also take over the annual maintenance inspections for the integrated system components. In exchange, I would keep the supplemental heating active during the pool season, roughly October through April. I turned the valve back on, and within 2 days, the pool temperature was back to normal. But the story does not end there because Deborah was not done. Even though she had been removed as president, she was still a resident of Sunset Ridge, and she was angry, very angry, It started with small things. My garbage cans would be knocked over the night before trash pickup. My newspaper would disappear from my driveway. Someone reported me to the county for an unpermitted structure, which turned out to be completely false and wasted a day of my time dealing with an inspector. I could not prove it was Deborah, but I had a pretty good idea. Then one morning in late April, I came out to find that someone had spray-painted HOA bully across my driveway in bright red paint. That was when I decided to install security cameras. I put up 4 cameras covering all angles of my property. They were the good kind, with night vision and motion detection that sent alerts to my phone. The installation company had them up and running within a day. Not even a week later, the cameras paid for themselves. At 2:15 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera app and saw a figure in dark clothing sneaking across my backyard. They were heading toward my propane tank with what looked like a toolbox. I called 911 immediately. "Scottsdale Police, what is your emergency?" "Someone is trespassing on my property and tampering with my propane tank," I said, giving them my address. "I have them on camera right now." "Stay inside your house, sir. Officers are on the way." I watched through the camera as the figure, definitely a woman based on the build and movements, tried to disconnect something from my propane system. She was struggling with a valve when the police cruisers pulled up, lights off, in front of my house. 2 officers came around the back, flashlights up. "Scottsdale Police, put your hands up." The woman froze, then bolted. She made it about 10 feet before one of the officers tackled her to the ground. Even through the grainy night vision camera footage, I could see the blonde hair, Deborah. I met the officers at my back gate. They had Deborah in handcuffs sitting on my patio. Her face was a mask of rage and something else, maybe fear. "Mr. Kellerman," one of the officers asked. I nodded. "This is your property?" "Yes, officer." "Do you know this woman?" "That is Deborah Owens. She lives next door. She is the former president of our HOA." The officer looked at Deborah, then back at me. "And you did not give her permission to be on your property?" "Absolutely not." "What about the propane system? Did you give her permission to work on it?" "No." "I want to press charges for trespassing and attempted vandalism or whatever else is applicable." The officer nodded. "We will need your camera footage. I can email it to you right now if you give me an address." Deborah finally spoke. "He shut off the community pool heating." "I was just trying to turn it back on." The officer looked confused. "Madam, you do not have the right to trespass on someone else's property regardless of your reasoning, and if this is his equipment, you definitely do not have the right to tamper with it. But the community needs it." Deborah protested. I stepped forward. "Officer, the community pool heating situation was resolved weeks ago. The system is currently running. She had no reason to be here except to cause problems." The second officer had been examining the propane system with his flashlight. "Sir, it looks like she was trying to disconnect this valve here. If she had succeeded, you would have had a significant propane leak. This is actually pretty dangerous." My blood ran cold. A propane leak near my house, near my pool, near my equipment that runs on electricity. Deborah had not just been trying to inconvenience me, she could have caused an explosion. "I want full charges pressed," I said firmly. "She could have killed someone." Deborah was arrested and taken away. The officers took my statement, collected the camera footage, and filed a report. They suggested I get a restraining order, which I did the very next morning. The fallout was spectacular. Word spread through the community instantly. Deborah's house went up for sale within 2 weeks. She was charged with criminal trespassing, attempted criminal damage, and reckless endangerment. The reckless endangerment charge was particularly serious because the prosecutor argued that attempting to create a propane leak in a residential area put multiple households at risk. I had to testify at her hearing in June. She showed up with a lawyer who tried to paint me as the villain, arguing that I had created a dangerous situation by shutting off the community heating and that Deborah was just trying to protect the neighborhood. The judge was not buying it. "Miss Owens," the judge said, "regardless of your grievances with the HOA situation, you committed multiple crimes. You trespassed on private property in the middle of the night. You attempted to tamper with equipment that you had no training or authorization to touch. And you created a situation that could have resulted in a catastrophic propane leak and explosion. The fact that you cannot see that you were in the wrong here is deeply troubling." Deborah was sentenced to 6 months in jail, with all but 30 days suspended, meaning she had to serve 30 days. She also got 2 years of probation, had to pay restitution for my security cameras and legal fees, and was ordered to have no contact with me. The judge also mandated anger management classes. Through all of this, the propane system kept running smoothly. The HOA made their reimbursement payments on time every month. The pool stayed warm. And life in Sunset Ridge slowly returned to normal. Linda turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She had a common-sense approach to enforcement. If something was actually a problem, she would have a conversation with the homeowner first before jumping to fines. The community appreciated it, and the constant tension that had existed under Deborah's reign disappeared. Tom and I became better friends through all of this. We started having beers on Friday evenings, sitting by my pool, laughing about the absurdity of everything that had happened. "You know what the craziest part is?" Tom said one evening. "All of this because she could see the top 6 inches of a white propane tank from her bedroom window. 6 inches. Some people just need to have control," I said. "And when they do not get it, they lose their minds." Well, she definitely lost her mind. 30 days in jail over an HOA dispute. That has got to be some kind of record. Deborah served her 30 days in the Maricopa County Jail. Her house sold in July to a nice family with 2 kids who loved using the community pool. I introduced myself when they moved in and explained the whole situation, just so they would understand the history. They thought it was hilarious and assured me they had no intention of causing any HOA drama. One afternoon in August, I was doing some maintenance on the pool equipment when I noticed something. The wooden enclosure around the propane tank that had started this whole mess was looking a bit weathered. The Arizona sun is brutal, and the wood had faded and cracked in places. I decided to replace it with something better. I called a contractor and had them build a much nicer enclosure using composite materials that would last decades. It was taller, sturdier, and completely concealed the tank from every possible angle, including from a second-story window next door. When it was finished, I took photos and sent them to Linda. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I upgraded the enclosure around the propane tank. Let me know if you need any documentation for the HOA files." Linda's response made me laugh. "Looks great. But honestly, after everything that happened, I think you could paint that tank hot pink and nobody would dare say a word to you about it." She was probably right. The legal proceedings finally concluded in September. Deborah's probation was progressing, apparently without incident. I had not seen her since the sentencing hearing, and I hoped I never would again. The restraining order would be in effect for 3 years, which meant she could not come within 500 feet of me or my property. One evening, I was sitting by the pool with a cold beer, watching the sun set over the mountains, and I realized something. The whole ordeal, as stressful and ridiculous as it had been, had actually made my life better in some ways. I had a better relationship with my neighbors. I had a fair agreement with the HOA about the heating costs. I had excellent security cameras that gave me peace of mind. And I had learned to stand up for myself instead of just accepting unreasonable demands. The propane tank hummed quietly in its new enclosure, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, heating my pool and supplementing the community system. It was the most boring, mundane piece of equipment anyone could imagine. And yet it had been the catalyst for exposing an abusive HOA president, bringing a community together, and teaching everyone involved some valuable lessons about property rights and reasonable enforcement. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Pool party this weekend. Forecast says 95 degrees. I typed back, "Absolutely. I will make sure the propane tank has us nice and heated for the evening swim." "Lol, never going to let that go, are you?" "Never," I replied, "because sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things." And sometimes a propane tank is not just a propane tank. It is a line in the sand, a test of character, and a reminder that standing up for what is right matters, even when the stakes seem trivial to everyone else. The pool temperature held steady at 78 degrees, the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, and life in Sunset Ridge was finally, blessedly peaceful. My propane tank kept doing its job, completely legal, properly permitted, and now beautifully enclosed. And Deborah Owens. Well, she learned the hard way that you cannot fine, harass, and terrorize your way into getting what you want, not without consequences. I raised my beer to the propane tank in a silent toast. "Thanks for everything, buddy. Turns out you were worth fighting for after all." The fall months rolled in, and October brought cooler mornings that made the heated pool even more enjoyable. The HOA's reimbursement checks arrived like clockwork. Linda proved to be not just a better president than Deborah, but an actual advocate for the homeowners rather than a tyrant with a clipboard. She instituted monthly community meetings where residents could voice concerns without fear of immediate fines. She worked with the management company to review all the existing violations and found that Deborah had issued over 40 questionable citations in her short tenure. Linda personally called each of those homeowners to apologize and rescinded every unfair fine. The community responded by becoming more engaged. People started actually attending HOA meetings. They volunteered for committees. The neighborhood felt like a community again rather than a police state. Tom's wife, Jennifer, organized a neighborhood barbecue in November. It was held at the community recreation area, and someone jokingly suggested we have a dedication ceremony for the propane tank that had saved them all from Deborah's reign of terror. I declined, but I appreciated the sentiment. At the barbecue, I met more of my neighbors than I had in the previous 2 years combined. Everyone had a Deborah story. The Hendersons told me about their tree situation. A couple named the Patels had been fined because their decorative doormat was the wrong shade of brown. Someone else had received a violation for parking their car on the street overnight when they had guests visiting. "It was like living under a microscope," Mrs. Henderson said. "We were actually thinking about selling and moving." "I am glad you did not," I said. "And I am glad things are better now." "Thanks to you," she replied. "If you had not stood up to her, we would all still be dealing with it." I had not thought about it that way. I had just been defending my property and my rights. But she was right that by refusing to back down, I had inadvertently freed the entire community from a toxic situation. The criminal case against Deborah concluded with her completing her 30-day jail sentence in November. Her probation officer would be monitoring her for the next 2 years, and she was required to complete anger management and counseling. According to Tom, who somehow always had the gossip, she had moved to Gilbert, about 20 miles away, to live with her sister. Good riddance, as far as I was concerned. December brought the holiday season, and Sunset Ridge was transformed. Houses lit up with decorations, and even that was easier under Linda's leadership. Deborah had rules about the specific dates decorations could go up and come down, the colors allowed, and the brightness levels permitted. Linda's philosophy was that if it made people happy and was not genuinely offensive, it was fine. I went all out with my decorations that year. Lights along the roofline, a big wreath on the door, and some tasteful luminarias along the driveway. And yes, I put a string of white lights around the propane tank enclosure just because I could. Tom thought it was hilarious. "You are decorating the tank now." "It is festive," I said with a grin. "Besides, it is part of the family. It has earned some holiday cheer." On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering. Tom and Jennifer came over, along with the Hendersons and a few other neighbors. We sat around the heated pool, drank spiked eggnog, and told stories. The propane system kept the water comfortable while the temperature dropped into the low 50s, and everyone agreed it was the perfect way to spend the evening. "This would not be possible without your setup," Tom said, gesturing to the pool. "I mean, technically we could sit outside, but jumping in a heated pool on Christmas Eve, that is pretty great. And the community pool is nice and warm too," Jennifer added. "My water aerobics class has been so much better since you turned the system back on. We actually have more people joining because word got out about how nice the temperature is. It felt good to know that standing my ground had led to positive outcomes for everyone, not just me." The new year arrived with the usual resolutions and fresh starts. January brought cooler weather, with morning temperatures sometimes dipping into the 30s. The propane system worked overtime, and I was grateful for the HOA's cost-sharing agreement. My propane bills would have been brutal otherwise. I received a detailed report from the management company showing exactly how much propane was being used for community heating versus my personal pool. It was transparent and fair, exactly what the arrangement should have been from the beginning. If Deborah had approached me reasonably from the start, we could have set up this agreement 2 years ago without any of the drama. In February, I got an unexpected call from a local news station. Apparently, someone had tipped them off about the situation, and they wanted to do a story about HOA overreach and how one homeowner fought back. I was hesitant at first. The whole thing felt very personal, and I was not sure I wanted it broadcast to the entire Phoenix metro area. But the reporter, a woman named Sarah, convinced me that it could help other people dealing with similar situations. "HOA horror stories are everywhere," she said. "But stories about homeowners successfully standing up for their rights, those are rare. People need to know they can fight back." I agreed to the interview, with the condition that they also interview Linda to show how the HOA had reformed under new leadership. The story aired in March, and it was surprisingly well done. They showed the propane tank enclosure, explained the heating system setup, and detailed Deborah's escalating actions that led to her arrest. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. I received dozens of emails and messages from people thanking me for speaking out. Several were dealing with their own HOA nightmares and wanted advice. I ended up spending hours talking to complete strangers about property rights, bylaws, and the importance of documentation. One man, dealing with an HOA demanding he remove solar panels that were saving him hundreds on electricity, used my story as a template for his own fight. He documented everything, cited the specific bylaw exceptions, and requested a board meeting. His situation resolved in his favor within a month. A woman in Temp was being fined for having a vegetable garden in her backyard that was supposedly visible from neighboring properties. She used my argument about the exception clauses and the importance of reasonable interpretation. Her fines were rescinded. Hearing these stories made all the stress and frustration worth it. I had not just been fighting for my propane tank. I had been fighting against the idea that HOAs could act as petty dictatorships without accountability. Spring arrived in full force, bringing wildflowers to the desert and temperatures climbing back into the 80s and 90s. The pool heating system was less necessary during the day, but those evening swims still required the warmth. The propane tank and I had reached a kind of understanding, a partnership that had survived Karen-level HOA assault and come out stronger. In April, Linda announced she would be running for a full term as HOA president in the upcoming election. Nobody ran against her. She won unanimously. At the meeting where the results were announced, she made a short speech. This past year has taught all of us valuable lessons about community, fairness, and the importance of reasonable governance. We have reformed our enforcement policies, improved our communication, and most importantly, we have remembered that we are neighbors first and an HOA second. I am honored to continue serving you all. Everyone applauded, and I felt a sense of pride in the community we had rebuilt. In May, I received a letter from Deborah's attorney. My first thought was panic. What now? But it turned out to be an apology letter that Deborah had been required to write as part of her probation conditions. It was stiff and formal, clearly written under duress, but it was something. Dear Mr. Kellerman, I am writing to apologize for my actions regarding the propane tank dispute and subsequent trespassing incident. My behavior was inappropriate and dangerous. I allowed my personal feelings and need for control to override common sense and legal boundaries. I am working with a therapist to address these issues. I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive me, though I understand if you cannot. I wish you well. Deborah Owens. I read it twice. Part of me wanted to tear it up. Part of me recognized that she was trying, even if it was court-mandated. I decided to file it away and move on. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting, but it did mean not carrying around anger that only hurt me. Tom and I were sitting by the pool one evening in late May when he asked, "Do you ever regret buying this house? With all the drama, was it worth it?" I thought about it for a long moment. You know what? Yeah, it was worth it. This house is amazing. The community, once we got rid of the toxic element, is great, and I learned a lot about standing up for myself. Plus, I have a heated pool year-round, which is pretty fantastic. And you are a local celebrity now, Tom added with a grin. The guy who took down an HOA tyrant with a propane tank. When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous. That is what makes it great. We clinked our beer bottles together and watched the sun set over the mountains, the pool heater humming softly in the background. The summer of that year was relatively quiet, which was exactly what I needed. I worked, I swam. I enjoyed my house and my neighborhood. The propane tank required its annual inspection in July, and the technician who came out was the same guy who had done the original installation. "Heard you had some trouble with this setup," he said, while checking the valves and connections. "That is putting it mildly." "Well, everything looks perfect. System is running great. Should give you years of trouble-free service. Good to hear. It has already given me more than enough excitement," he laughed. "Yeah, equipment is not supposed to be exciting. Boring is good in this business." I appreciated that philosophy. As fall approached again, marking more than a year since the whole ordeal had begun, I reflected on how much had changed. The community was healthier. The HOA was functional rather than tyrannical. My relationships with my neighbors were genuine. And my propane tank, the humble piece of equipment that had started everything, continued to do its job without complaint. In September, I was contacted by an attorney who specialized in HOA law. He had seen the news story and wanted to interview me for a book he was writing about homeowner rights. I spent an afternoon with him, going through the entire timeline, showing him all my documentation and explaining my thought process at each decision point. "You did everything right," he said when we finished. "You documented everything. You cited specific bylaws. You tried to work within the system. And when the system failed, you used legal leverage without being vindictive. This is going to be a great case study." The idea that my experience might help educate others about their rights made me smile. Maybe some good could come from all that stress after all. October brought cooler weather again, and the restart of the heating system's heavy use. The HOA made their reimbursement payments, the community pool stayed warm, and life continued in peaceful routine. One afternoon, I was working in my home office when I saw a moving truck pull up to Deborah's old house, which had been empty since the new family had only used it as a rental property. A young couple got out, looking excited and a little nervous. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I am Peter, I live next door." "Oh, hi, I am David and this is my wife Emma, we just bought this place." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "It is a great community." Emma looked around at the desert landscaping and the mountains in the background. "It seems beautiful. We are so excited to finally have our own house. If you need anything or have questions about the neighborhood, feel free to ask," I offered. "Actually," David said, "the realtor mentioned something about some HOA drama that happened here." "With the previous owner," I laughed. "Yeah, that was quite a situation. But the person involved moved away and the HOA has new leadership now. Everything is running smoothly. Just follow the basic community standards, be a good neighbor, and you will be fine." "Good to know," Emma said, looking relieved. As I walked back to my house, I realized how far we had all come. New neighbors who did not have to worry about HOA tyranny, a functional community association, and me, still enjoying my heated pool without harassment. The propane tank sat in its enclosure, completely unremarkable to anyone who did not know the story. Just a standard white tank doing a standard job, but I knew better. That tank represented something bigger. The importance of standing up for yourself, the value of community, and the reality that sometimes the smallest things become the biggest battles. I spent that evening by the pool, as I often did, watching the stars come out in the clear desert sky. The water was perfectly heated, exactly 78 degrees. The system was running smoothly. Everything was as it should be. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "HOA board meeting next week. Topics include holiday decoration guidelines and community event planning." "Nothing controversial, I promise." I texted back. "Sounds good, I will be there." And that right there was the victory, not the court case or the news story or the apology letter. The real victory was being able to engage with my HOA without fear, anxiety, or the expectation of unreasonable demands. It was being able to participate in my community as an equal rather than as a subject under scrutiny. As the years went by, the story of the propane tank incident became neighborhood legend. New residents would hear about it and look at me with a mixture of amusement and respect. Kids in the neighborhood referred to me as the pool guy, which I found endearing. Tom eventually moved to Oregon for a job opportunity, but we stayed in touch. On our last evening together before his move, we sat by the pool one more time. "You know what I am going to miss most about Arizona," he said. "The heat," I joked. No, sitting here with you, drinking beer by this ridiculously well-heated pool and knowing that it represents someone refusing to be pushed around. It is weirdly inspiring. It is just a pool, Tom. No, man, it is not just a pool. It is your pool heated by your system on your terms. That matters. Maybe he was right. Maybe the things we fight for, no matter how small they seem, define who we are and what we are willing to tolerate. I had drawn a line at a propane tank, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my peace of mind and helped my community do the same. The propane tank still sits in its enclosure today, still heats my pool and supplements the community system, and still represents the time I stood up to an HOA tyrant and won. Every time I swim, every time I see that reimbursement check from the HOA, every time a neighbor thanks me for making Sunset Ridge a better place to live, I am reminded that fighting for what is right, even in the face of pettiness and harassment, is always worth it. Deborah Owens taught me an important lesson, though not the one she intended. She taught me that bullies rely on people backing down, on apathy, on the assumption that fighting back is too much trouble. She taught me that documentation and persistence are powerful tools. And she taught me that sometimes the most important stands we take are over things that seem insignificant to everyone else but matter deeply to us. So here is to propane tanks, heated pools, reformed HOAs, and the courage to say no when someone tries to push you around. Here is to knowing your rights, standing your ground, and refusing to let anyone make you feel small in your own home. And here is to communities that can heal, neighbors who can support each other, and the simple satisfaction of swimming in a perfectly heated pool that nobody, absolutely nobody, can take away from you. The sun sets over Scottsdale every evening, painting the desert in gold and orange. My pool stays warm year-round. The HOA operates fairly and transparently. And somewhere, maybe Deborah has learned her lesson, but whether she has or not does not matter to me anymore. I won the fight that mattered. I protected my property, my rights, and my peace of mind. Everything else is just details. The propane tank hums quietly in the background, a constant reminder that sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories. And I would not change a thing.